She said it with a smile. If you hadn't failed, my success wouldn't matter as much. And everyone else just stayed quiet, like it made sense. That was the moment I realized silence hurts deeper than insults because it means they agree. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just walked away and made sure the next time they saw me, they'd remember it forever. Before we dive in, let me know. What time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The day returns in crisp pieces, the air biting before the door even opens. Autumn had just started peeling the green off the trees, and a chill settled deep into your collarbones, like it belonged there. I stood on the porch a little longer than necessary, not hesitating, just bracing. Inside the dining room, posed for a catalog, the table gleamed with its polished silver candles, glowing with intention, but failing to reach the faces around them. Linen napkins folded into stiff triangles. Water glasses matched to the millimeter. A roast shimmered beneath the chandelier. Cambria held court at the head posture sculpted expression, honed to a careful edge. Mom lifted the corners of her mouth without letting her eyes move. Dad rotated his glass slowly, as if time inside it might thin itself out. Jude offered a nod, the kind you give someone at a funeral, not out of grief, but obligation. They'd set my place at the far end by the window and a dress on the outskirts. I hadn't even touched my napkin before Cambria slid an envelope across the table. No ceremony, no preamble. I opened it slow and deliberate. A Walmart gift card, $50. She delivered it while pressing one corner of her mouth flat. Just something to get you started again. That was it. No chuckle, no half wink. Just a statement placed with the same ease as silverware. Every hand stayed near its own plate, and the correction never came. Jude shifted. Dad sipped. Mom laid her napkin in her lap like it was a ritual, not an avoidance. I slid the card into my jacket pocket and let the silverware speak for me. Reached for the green beans. My fingers barely wrapped the fork. The potatoes were cold, but not colder than the quiet. They didn't flinch. That was the part that stayed. How okay they all were with it. Like this had been blocked and staged and rehearsed until nobody blinked. Cambria resumed her meal. Her knife skimmed the porcelain in neat, controlled strokes. Jude's mouth twitched open, maybe about to speak, maybe to drop some useless line about her intentions. But nothing came. And into that silence, Cambria laughed. Loud, unbothered. The sound sliced through the room like glass through silk. I chewed slowly and let my gaze slide toward the window, past the curtain, hemmed to the old tree I used to climb when I still believed things could be fixed. Its bark shone faintly in the candlelight ridges, catching shadows, while the branches shivered in the wind outside. My palm was still pressed around the gift card when I stepped into the hallway for water, the plastic edge digging in like a ticket you couldn't refuse. The light hummed overhead and bleached the corners until the air felt clinical. I leaned into the counter card still between my fingers and stared at the glass front cabinet where Mom kept her good china. Every cup aligned like a showroom, untouched for years probably, just like everything this family deemed too delicate or too real, sealed behind glass, declared valuable and never used. I'd hoped coming back would at least earn eye contact that landed and stayed. Not forgiveness, I didn't owe them a damn apology. Just a nod. Something that said, you were missed, but they never had to call me a failure. Their silence signed the form. Cambria paraded our pride like a banner she stitched herself. Even as kids, she choreographed her own highlight reel honor roll internships, matching planners. Dad used to joke she'd end up in office. Mom didn't joke, she planned for it. And me, I was spirited. Hard to pin down. At least she found structure in the military. I caught that last one at dinner once when I was home on leave. They meant it like praise. I poured a glass of water and left it full on the counter. My reflection in the kitchen window looked like a smudge, faded off-center. I didn't fix it. Mom entered, humming something tuneless. She wiped down a countertop that already shined. Neither of us said a word. The space between us behaved like a waiting room, orderly and airless. She brushed past like I wasn't there, opened a cabinet and busied her hands with nothing. Her eyes met mine for half a breath, then darted away. I asked, voice low, "Did you need help with anything?" She shook her head. "I've got it." She said the words dry as chalk. I nodded anyway, even though she didn't see it. Her cloth moved in tighter circles, scrubbing invisible grime. Soft footsteps entered. Jude, half-finished drink in hand, that sheepish look he wore when he wanted to say something decent but hadn't rehearsed it enough. He opened the fridge, pulled out the orange juice, and poured me a glass. "I figured you'd want something sweeter," he said. I took it. "Thanks." He braced one hip against the counter and anchored his hands under his elbows. "Cam? She can be blunt. You know how she is." "Yeah," I said, rolling the glass in my palm. "I know exactly how she is. She means well. She just thinks everything's her responsibility. That's one way to put it." He scratched behind his neck, let out a breath. "She is organizing everyone as if a schedule could fix it." "I'm not asking her to fix anything." "You're right," he said and nodded again. I hate the tension." That was Jude. Always the soft edge. Always the buffer. He wanted peace, even if it meant ignoring the fire behind the wallpaper. He offered a half smile and slipped out, probably proud we didn't argue. The kitchen door thudded shut behind him. I took a small sip, then drew the card back from my pocket. Turned it over. No handwriting, no name. Not even a dot of ink. Just 50 silent dollars. A gift with no giver. As if I didn't need to exist to receive it. I set it down on the counter and watched the dull shine of its plastic surface. Pressed my thumb to the edge, wondering when the last time was that someone in this house gave me anything without expectation tied to it. Outside, the wind tapped the windows. I stepped closer, fingertips resting against the chilled glass. The maple anchored the yard bark, ridged like old rope and limbs thinning toward the streetlight. I used to climb it until Mom yelled from the porch, sure I'd fall. Dad never flinched. He'd stay by the grill arms crossed, muttering, "She won't fall." She knows what she's doing. That tree hadn't budged. Even now its leaves whispered against the night, holding fast, holding still. And I stood there watching them tremble in the wind, feeling like I was still 10 years old, halfway up that tree, visible but unreachable. I took the long way to the cafe, not because I needed the walk, but because I needed time. The morning air in Asheville had a bite to it, sharp and clean, and I let it scrape through my lungs like wire. The outdoor cafe sat just off the main square, tucked between a boutique bookstore and an overpriced juice bar. I picked a table facing the sidewalk, watching strangers pass in muted fall colors. Every gaze drifted past me, the way steam slides off a cup. Not the barista with the nose ring, not the man pushing a stroller, not the couple whisper arguing 2 tables over. I was invisible, and not in the poetic way. I mean, literally unseen. No one looked at me and thought, officer, leader, someone who'd crawled through mud and slept in a dugout with her boots on. Someone who'd ordered boys barely old enough to rent a car into live fire. Just a woman with dark circles and a coffee. I cupped the mug and let the heat travel boneward. I hadn't expected to feel anything about this meeting, not dread, not hope. But when I saw Connor approaching, something shifted in my chest. Recognition or the echo of tents and red dust. He hadn't changed much. Still broad-shouldered and clean-cut, walking with that stiff tilt, like his knees had long since filed a complaint. "Rowan," he said, pulling out the chair across from mine. "You look, well, that's generous." He gave a dry chuckle and motioned for the waitress. "Still drink black, still pretend it tastes good." We sat in the lull while he ordered. I watched a man across the street try and fail to parallel park for the 3rd time. There was something weirdly soothing about that. "You settled back in?" Connor asked once the coffee came. Define settled. He tilted his head. "They know your folks." I didn't answer right away. The spoon in my saucer had a chip in it. I ran my thumb along the edge. "They know I'm back," I said finally. "They just don't care why." His eyebrows lifted. And you're okay with that, no? But I'm used to it. Connor tapped the rim of his cup. You could have spelled it out for them. What you did over there. What you led. Hell, half the guys still talk about how you dragged that medic out under fire. They'd salute that. I shook my head. I don't want their salute for a story they won't read. He fished a plastic-sleeved card from his inner pocket and placed it on the table between us. I opened it slowly. A folded card, edges curled, ink washed pale from time or water, a soldier's handwriting urgent, uneven. I'm alive because Lene. Sayer held the line when everyone else ran. She stayed when it would have been smarter to leave. I owe her my life. I looked up. Connor's voice dropped. He gave that to me before we rotated out. I kept it. Figured you might need it more than I did. The ink wavered as my throat locked and heat crowded my eyes. I'd brought men home, brought silence, brought trauma sealed in medical folders, but I couldn't bring back something as basic as recognition from the people who taught me to ride a bike. That kid, he hadn't known me more than 6 weeks. And still, I was clinging to his thank you, like it was proof I hadn't imagined it all. Connor didn't say more. He didn't need to. I slid the card back into its sleeve. Thanks, I said quietly. He nodded. If you ever need anything. I didn't answer. Neither of us expected me to. We stood, hugged briefly, no backpats, no forced words, just the tension of people who've seen the same fire but lived it differently. When I stepped out of the cafe, the square lifted with early shoppers and low talk. Across the street, in a small lawn patch beside a sculpture garden, a girl no older than 6 held a foam bow and arrow. She aimed at a cardboard deer, missed wide, and let out a fearless shout. I stopped, not because of the game, because no one fined her for missing, no clipboard, no correction, no older sister turning the rules into gospel, just a kid allowed to miss and still laugh like she'd won. I stood there a moment longer. Then I turned toward the office building where mistakes came with price tags and power wore perfume. The elevator bell cut through the corridor. I stepped out into glass and steel. The office was unmistakably Cambria's terrain. Her firm occupied the 14th floor of a building with too much marble in the lobby and just enough quiet to make you second-guess your footsteps. The receptionist spoke evenly and waved me toward the corner office. I walked past framed degrees, spotless glass, and a view of the city that whispered, "We've already won." Cambria was waiting in a corner suite that smelled faintly of eucalyptus and polished wood. The blinds were half open, casting sunlight into obedient squares on the carpet. She stood when I entered, extended a handshake like we were finalizing escrow. "Thanks for coming," she said, as if this were optional. Jude was already there, perched on the window ledge, wearing the look of a man halfway through swallowing a regret. The leather resisted under my shoulders, and I settled in without adjusting. Cambria clicked something on her tablet. The flat screen on the wall came alive charts, bullet points, a color-coded budget. Her cadence slid into polished briefing mode. "As you know, we're finalizing arrangements for Mom and Dad's care. The cost projections are here. We're all expected to contribute." Her pen tapped against the chair arm. "I assumed you might not have liquidity, so I thought of another option. You could help with their care. Physical presence. Time." She made it sound like an offer on clearance. I scanned the pie graphs and margins. "Efficient, sharp, cruel. Chore rotations," I asked. "You want me to take Thursdays for diaper duty?" Cambria gave that tight-lipped twitch she used instead of laughing. Not amusement containment. "I'm just being practical," she said. "Your liquidity is probably tight right now, and we've all made sacrifices." Jude took a pay cut to move closer. I shifted cases to make room for this. "I didn't ask you to." She shrugged. "Still had to be done." I leaned forward. "Cambria, who do you think I am?" Her expression didn't flicker. "I know who you are. You're a soldier. But even soldiers need support." Her volume never changed. That was her specialty, damage in lowercase. Jude shifted in his seat. I turned toward him. He studied the skyline like it might offer absolution. Cambria reached behind her, retrieved a manila folder, and laid it on the table like an artifact. This is the working draft of the financial plan. It's not final, but I'd like your input. I opened it. Line items breakdowns, estimated long-term expenses, efficient sterile. Then page 3, bottom margin. Rowan Sayer, income unknown, assumed low tier. The words didn't shout, but they echoed with precision. Cambria studied me the way counsel watches a witness. I closed the folder gently. I think I've read the whole document. Rowan. No, I said, rising. You spelled out exactly where you rank me. Jude stood too late and hesitant. She didn't mean it like that. She typed it Jude. That's more deliberate than saying it. No one followed me into the hallway. The elevator arrived immediately. I stepped inside and turned to face the doors. From my coat, I pulled out the velvet pouch, creased and familiar. I unwrapped it. My campaign medal, bronze. The edges dulled, not by time, but by fingers that held it too often in silence. The ribbon had frayed at one corner thread, pulled loose like the rest of me. The elevator beeped for the lobby. I reseated the ribbon and slid the medal deep into my coat, then walked out, every word I could have said, sealed under my tongue like teeth. By the time the doors parted to streetlight, the medal was still warm in my coat pocket. The road banked through hills stippled with rust and ember. One hand on the wheel, the other pressed over that hidden weight. I let the drive stretch. I hadn't stashed it back in a drawer. Couldn't really. It stayed with me now, the only weight that still made sense. It was the only ground in this town that accepted my weight. No stares, no whispers, no questions wrapped in polite smiles, just grass and wind and names carved in stone. The military section didn't bother with fences or formality, only a crooked gate propped open with a rock, as if no one trusted it to stay still on its own. I parked beneath an old tree whose branches dipped low over the drive, like it knew exactly how tired this stretch of land could make you. My boots grated on gravel and the wind tested my collar. I walked slowly between the rows, each stone like a nameplate in a forgotten meeting. White marble silent formation. Private Daniel Hasker, 23, KIA Southern Afghanistan, March 19, 2021. I dropped to the grass and hooked my elbows over my knees. The granite was dense and steady, familiar like a pack you've carried too far. Hey, I murmured, brushing dirt from the edge. You wouldn't believe this week. The wind shifted just enough to remind me it was still there. I saw Cambria. I continued. She's orchestrating everything now. Delegates like a senator smiles like she's doing you a favor. Gave me a Walmart card. $50. That's what my time's worth, apparently. I let out a hard breath that tasted metallic. Guess that's the market rate for not dying. A leaf skated across the grass. I caught it before it landed, turned it in my hand. Sometimes my body aches for the barracks rhythm. Not the noise, not the stink, just the clarity, orders, eye contact, people who said exactly what they meant even when they hated your guts. A slip of paper peeked out beneath the headstone just at the base. I tugged it free, folded twice, soft around the edges, still legible. To whoever brought him home, thank you. I sleep better because you didn't let him die alone. No signature. Didn't need one. She'd sent voice messages to the base for his birthday, even made pink frosted cookies that arrived crushed, but still tasted like affection. His wife. His tether to this world. I held the note until the ink softened at the edges. People who barely knew me had trusted me with everything, and the ones who raised me. They couldn't even look me in the eye. I slid the note back where I found it. No grand speeches, no rituals, just me kneeling in the grass while the trees swayed like they were holding something in. Eventually, I stood and brushed off my jeans, gave the stone a quiet nod. Still holding the line, I said, I'm trying. I headed for the car with pressure stacked under my ribs that didn't pass for grief, didn't take the highway back, cut through side roads where the trees leaned over the asphalt and telephone poles tilted like they were done holding things upright. The sky had started to shift gray, lifting light, pressing through in pale streaks. Then just before I hit the main drag, I passed that tiny white church with the painted marquee out front. This week's message: who among you is forgotten in their own family? I hit the brakes like something had stepped in front of me. Pulled over. Hard. I clicked the hazards and let the slow metronome mark the shoulder. Tick, tick, tick. I didn't cry. Didn't even swallow hard. But my breath fractured shallow and sharp as if each inhale had to tiptoe past the heaviness nesting in my ribs. I stared through the windshield while the question hovered in my chest like a flare that didn't burn out. Who among you is forgotten? No answer came, but I stayed a while longer, engine running blinkers echoing in the hush. Because sometimes the only thing louder than being ignored is being reminded of it by someone who wasn't even aiming at you. The blinker still ticked when I shifted into gear and steered toward the one place I knew I couldn't dodge. The lobby doors hissed open, and that familiar VA air pressed against my skin, disinfectant old paper burned coffee. People didn't come here to be saved. They came because there was nowhere else to go. Cambria's call landed without greeting or pleas. "Mom's got her rheumatology appointment at 11, she said. "It overlaps with my foundation luncheon. Can you take her?" I let the silence speak for me, but she barreled through it. "You're back in town, Rowan. You can take Mom to the appointment." No argument, no protest. I said yes, not out of obligation, but because I wanted time with Mom alone. Time to look her in the eyes and ask what had been eating at me since that night at the table. She was already on the porch when I pulled up. Coat too tightly buttoned, purse clutched in both hands like it might fly away if she didn't anchor it. She climbed in, buckled, and fixed her purse in her lap as if this were a routine errand. "They redid the lobby," she said halfway through the drive. "Used to be dull beige. Now it's shinier beige." I hummed in reply. She looked out the window, tapping the purse strap in slow, nervous beats. Inside the lobby stayed low a TV muttering captions to itself. A few men in wheelchairs lined the far wall, either staring into space or locked in thoughts they weren't sharing. An older woman with a cane asked a nurse something and nodded at the answer. Routine ghosts in a routine place. We checked in, sat, waited. Mom leafed through a magazine with outdated headlines, flipping without reading. I watched her fingers instead. The way they moved, delicate but certain, like she didn't need the content, just the motion. When the hallway thinned and the echoes of names faded, I asked, "Did it bother you when Cambria handed me that card?" She didn't look up. "You are too sensitive. Everyone is trying to be practical." My jaw flexed. I bit the inside of my cheek. Practical. Like humiliation was a resource. Like silence was a strategy. She hadn't defended me because she didn't think there was anything to defend. That was the truth of it. When her name was called, she took my arm as if this had always been our rhythm. We moved through a corridor flanked by photos of soldiers, gripping the hands of officials, framed moments, medals catching light, none of them telling the truth about what came after. Her appointment took 25 minutes. I stayed near a window watching rain collect on the sill like a slow-moving clock. When she emerged, her face held that familiar weight, not pain exactly, but fatigue's quiet cousin. We said little, walking back. The only sound came from our soles on the tile. Then behind us, the elevator bell cut through the corridor. I turned. Cambria. She wore a beige trench and salon hair, her heels setting a crisp tempo on the tile. In one hand, a framed certificate, another accolade for the wall. Her eyes met mine for half a second. She didn't stop, just turned her head and passed without a word, like we existed on separate floors of reality. Mom didn't flinch. Maybe she hadn't noticed. Maybe she didn't care. I held the glass door open. She passed through without a thank you. I lingered. To the right, barely visible in the shadow of the wall, was the smaller entrance marked Veteran. I'd passed it so many times, never used it, never wanted the questions, the stares, the assumptions. But now, maybe it was the way my mother refused to see me. Maybe it was Cambria erasing me with a glance. Maybe I was just tired of being edited out. I reached into my pocket. felt the ribbon. Not the metal, just the commendation. The small one, lightweight in theory, but not in meaning. No one here knew about it. No one at home had ever asked. And that was the point, wasn't it? I looked at my reflection in the glass. Wrinkled coat, eyes rimmed red from dry air, shoulders square, not proud but braced. I stepped through the veteran door without theater or appeal, not because I wanted attention, but because it was mine to use. The first thing that hit me in the gym was the varnish sharp clinging to the back of my throat, layered over the ghost of cheap cologne. My boots echoed once on the polished floor before the banners came into focus, navy and gold edges peeling like they hadn't moved since senior year. A folding sign read, Annual Alumni Honor Assembly, hosted by Asheville Veterans Chapter. The local veterans rep had pulled my name from a database and asked me to speak. You'd be our first female officer speaker, he'd said. It'd mean a lot to the younger crowd. I agreed because I expected a modest assembly in a half-filled gym. But what I walked into wasn't modest at all. Floodlights washed a temporary stage, set dead center on the court. Red, white, and blue bunting framed the walls like someone had mistaken this for a campaign rally. Folding chairs filled with students, teachers, and parents stretched toward the back wall. On stage stood the principal, and beside her Cambria. A cream blazer framed her shoulders, and not a hair strayed from the set part. Her voice rang through the mic with the polished cadence of someone who'd been practicing since high school debate. And we're so proud to award this year's Maddox Family Scholarship to a student who exemplifies leadership excellence and perseverance. Maddox Family Scholarship. I froze. Her smile stretched across the projector screen, her photo layered above a slogan, Rooted in Service. Committed to success. I scanned the crowd, wondering if anyone else saw it. The irony. The rewrite. I was the one who enlisted, the one who scrubbed blood off boots in sand. But there she was, draping our family name in patriotism, while I waited in the shadows like a historical footnote. When they called my name to speak, it was brief. A nod from the announcer. No image, no quote, no story. I crossed to the podium and lowered the mic until it met my mouth. I was never the kid anyone thought would leave Asheville, I began. But I did. I left, and I learned things in places that didn't have locker bells or lunch breaks. A few students in the front row looked up from their phones. I've been called a lot of things. Some kind, some not. But the most important thing I learned out there wasn't how to follow orders. It was how to recognize the people who wait for you to come home and the ones who don't even notice you left. The point stood without a footnote. I'm grateful for the teachers who believed in me, and for the quiet ones because they often listen hardest. No grand sign-off. I stepped back. Applause skimmed the room and broke apart before it reached the back row. I left the stage. The floor felt slick under my boots. I moved without pause past the bleachers and toward the exit, the sound of conversations rising behind me like TV static I couldn't tune out. Just as I pushed the double doors, a voice called after me, Rowan. I turned. The principal smiled. We hope to have your sister speak again soon. She was very inspiring. I nodded. Nothing more. She turned already mid-laugh with someone else. I walked alone to my car. No students followed. No one asked for a photo. I was invisible again. The gym doors closed behind me. In the car, I reached for the glove box. Inside was the laminated certificate I'd kept for years, my commendation for leadership in a high-risk op. It had traveled with me state to state, glove box to glove box, never displayed, just there. Proof. I waited in my palm until my fingers cooled. Then I folded the certificate and tore it cleanly into quarters. The sound was small final, paper pretending to be worth more than it ever was. I dropped the pieces into the trash bag, clipped to the gear shift. The engine hummed low and steady like breath, finding its way back after holding too much for too long. Darkness kept the porch unmarked except for the house number. At the threshold, I let the laughter inside settle into a pattern. Bright dresses, polished shoes, a cocktail shaker rattling like it had practiced for this night. Cambria's voice floated above the rest mid-joke, followed by synchronized laughter smooth as jazz. The doorbell stayed untouched as I slipped along the siding. The backyard wasn't lit, just the moon high and hollow, casting soft blue across the lawn. The old maple leaned over the yard like a familiar lookout, gnarled, a little stooped now, but still standing its post. I used to climb it barefoot toes, gripping bark, believing I could disappear into the canopy. From up there, I was the one watching, never watched. That tree knew more about me than my parents ever had. I dropped to the damp ground and set my spine against the trunk. The earth gave under my weight, cool and steady. It smelled of bark moss and the rust of water from the sprinklers. I thumbed the recorder app and brought up the file. If you don't fail, then what does my success even mean? Cambria's voice unfiltered exact. That sharp cadence I didn't need a screen to remember. The recording wasn't some outburst. It was cold calculated, said like a fact, like she'd been waiting to say it. It was about control, not care. The room noise swelled and glass chimed near the slider. Footsteps neared the door. I tapped pause and let the night press against my ears. Didn't expect you here, Jude. He came out with a lit cigarette, the ember a single pulse between us. Didn't knock, I said. Didn't have to. He blew the smoke sideways. They're too busy anyway. She's working the room like a senator. I tilted my head back against the tree and said nothing. Leaves above shifted, whispering in a language I used to understand. Jude sat beside me close, but not in the way. I heard what she said to you at the office, he said after a beat. I didn't move. She's wrong, he added. You didn't fail. Doesn't matter, I said. She needed me to. A long silence. Leaves drifted between us. She always feared you a little, you know. That made me glance sideways. Because you didn't need her. You wouldn't play her games. She hated that. She controlled everything else. He nodded slowly. Still does. Or thinks she does. We sat like that, two grown kids who shared closets and casseroles, and a family that never quite stuck. I told him I was not chasing payback, only balance. Jude looked up. She thinks this is her turf, he said. But it never was. I opened my phone again. The recording still blinked. I didn't hesitate this time. I attached the file in an email, typed in the name I'd bookmarked weeks ago, an independent columnist who ran a local newsletter called Behind the Welcome Mats. Her job was to pop the bubbles everyone else lived inside. I wrote one line in the message body model family. Then I sent it. The send haptic buzzed my palm harder than I expected. Something loosened just enough to be noticed. Inside, Cambria's laughter rang again, full and bright, and designed to echo. Out here, it no longer reached. I looked over. Jude gave a half smile, the kind that didn't pretend anything got better just because you stopped pretending. Then he crushed the cigarette under his boot. The ember smudged out to a dull gray. The ember's afterglow still lingered in my vision when the live stream blinked on. A brief hiccup, and the feed steadied on her shoes. Pale 4-inch heels, knife-point toes, balanced like armor. I remembered them from her high school closet. Cambria had been obsessed with power posture since we were kids, staging mock trials in the backyard. Now she wore those heels like armor, taking the stage at the county community center with her husband beside her like a campaign manager. I tracked the feed at a window two top while the coffee went lukewarm. Outside, the lake held still. Beneath the late afternoon sun, glass smooth like nothing was about to break. Folding chairs faced a banner that read, "Together for our veterans," while reporters scribbled into pads beside their recorders. It wasn't a flashy event, but the room held weight donors, city board members, someone from the state veterans office. The kind of crowd Cambria curated like a wine list. She took the mic with courtroom calm and a delivery honed by galas. It's a privilege she began to give back to the veterans who've given so much for this country. The audience nodded. A few clapped before she even finished. Her husband smiled like it was scripted. The slideshow began behind her. Images of check handovers, ribbon cuttings, clipped headlines, each one stamped with her name, Cambria Maddox, advocate, donor, sister to a veteran. That last line made something tighten in my chest. I leaned back, thumbed the volume up a notch, and waited. The live stream was delayed by 15 seconds, but I already knew what was next. The screen behind her glitched and cut to black. Then audio. "If you don't fail, then what does my success even mean?" Cambria's voice. Not the public one. This was raw, off-mic intimate. No speechwriter, no polish. Just her admitting what I'd always suspected. The room noise collapsed into silence. "I need you beneath me. Otherwise, none of this holds." Program stopped rustling and shoulders locked in place. Cambria halted mid-vowel and let the silence meet her. A woman in the front row reached for her phone. Another leaned toward her partner and whispered without blinking. Jude sat in the second row, frozen eyes stuck to the stage like he was watching someone pull off a mask he'd never dared name. She forced a short laugh that scraped the PA and died in the corners. That was, clearly a private conversation. Taken out of context, she said, stepping sideways from the mic. It doesn't reflect anything about our family values. Hands stayed on laps and no one reached for applause. Behind her, the projector stilled on a black waveform, Cambria's voice etched in neon blue lines like a confession under glass. The lines settled like dust and refused to lift. I kept my hands around the cup and let the scene finish without me. Outside the cafe window, a little girl in a camo jacket tore across the park, chasing her brother toward the water. Her voice rang sharp and fierce, then vanished into trees. Wild and uncurated. Free. The feed cut. Cambria remained on stage, but the presence had gone out of her. She wasn't unraveling. She was already unraveled, only now everyone could see the threads. The coffee tasted bitter and still managed to warm my throat. I opened my notebook and drew a hard stroke through a line I had written months ago. They win because they speak louder. Beneath it, I wrote, "Let the tape play." Walked straight to the door, hand off the bell. No call, no text, no warning. Above the Black Hawk skimmed the roofs and pressed the air flat over the block. Curtains twitched. Porch flags vanished into the night. A few neighbors stepped out with phones, raised their mouths open in half-curious awe. But this wasn't about spectacle. This was about showing the paper and ending the guessing. The pilot hovered long enough for the rotor wash to rattle windows and scatter gravel across the driveway. That aircraft could have landed anywhere, but tonight it landed in front of the house that used to belong to all of us. Now it belonged to me. I climbed down the skid while the rotor wash shouldered my coat and tugged loose strands of hair across my cheek. One hand held my bag, the other a sealed envelope. The porch light flared and flooded the entry. The door opened like a queue. Cambria stood in the frame wine glass, in hand heels planted. Whatever anecdote she was mid-spin inside died the second she saw me. Her face didn't fall, it froze. Behind her, the table was dressed for performance. Tall candles, trimmed napkins, polished forks. Dad's fork paused midair. Mom went pale. Jude hovered near the stairs like a shadow. No one moved. Mouths held open, and silverware paused midair. I crossed the threshold without invitation. The smell of rosemary chicken clung to the room, but it didn't touch me. I set my bag quietly by the entryway and walked toward the dining room with a measured calm. I reached into my coat and pulled out the Walmart gift card, her version of gratitude the night I came home. I placed it beside the cranberries and turned the envelope face up. Cambria's heels set a crisp tempo on the hardwood as she approached. "What's this?" Her voice, clipped eyes already scanning for an out. "Ownership documents," I said. "This house was leased through a trust. I bought it last month." She opened the folder and color drained from her cheeks. "That trust wasn't even in your name." "The trust didn't need my name to be traceable." She blinked fast, recalculating. This place was meant for presentation, she tried, a temporary platform. "You think this stunt matters?" I looked around at the walls, photos I never appeared in, chairs I never filled, memories staged without me. "I placed a price on your contempt," I said, "and I paid it in full." She scoffed. "Petty." "No." I stepped closer, voice low. This is the sound of me rising above. I pivoted toward the door as the blades gathered speed in a clean, insistent thrum. Rowan Dad's voice broke across the table. "Let's talk. Please, I didn't stop." Mom shifted like she might follow, but Jude reached out and gently anchored her shoulder. His eyes met mine across the hallway, steady, silent. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch. Outside, the wind caught my coat and lifted the edges like wings. I gripped the railing boots landing on the grass that had once stained my knees. I passed the swing Cambria replaced, the mailbox she painted over, the lawn she landscaped into something too symmetrical to feel like home. When I reached the aircraft, I turned once. Cambria stood in the doorway, hair wild folder in hand. "You can't just walk away from this." The wind devoured her. I climbed aboard. The hatch sealed shut. Noise swallowed everything. Through the side glass, I saw her still shouting, still pointing. The receptionist's eyes were warm and her face stayed professional. I liked that. There was something steady about people who didn't use charm as currency. The office carried pine cleaner over a base of worn carpet. Not unpleasant, just forgettable. Maybe that's what I wanted, nothing grand, nothing glossy. Just paper, ink, and proof. I took the chair opposite the paralegal, a gray blazered woman with a hummingbird tattoo at the wrist. She tapped a few keys, then slid a folder across the desk. "Final step," she said. "Once you sign these, the deed transfers back to your parents. The property will be in their names. No liens, no debt." She paused. "You're sure about the clause excluding your sister? We can set it so she has no future claim, but it'll be irreversible." I confirmed that was exactly what I wanted. She nodded back and turned the folder toward me. Her voice softened. "Do you want this listed under your name, or we can assign it to your LLC if you'd prefer anonymity?" I looked at the blank line waiting for ownership. "No company vehicle, no foundation credit, and no plaque," I said. "I don't need credit for what should have been theirs to begin with, and I meant it. They could keep the yard, the walls, even the swing Cambria had replaced because it looked cheap in pictures. I didn't care. What mattered wasn't the bricks. It was the boundary I'd drawn." As she stamped the seal, my phone vibrated against the lining of my coat. A message from Jude. "You don't have to come back, but if someday you want someone who tells the truth, I'm still here." I kept my face still while my shoulders finally dropped like unhooking body armor you forgot you were wearing. I signed the deed line by line, and she pressed the notary's seal until it clicked. The legal process only took minutes, but I didn't rush to leave. Cambria hadn't shown her face since the night of the helicopter. Her name faded from local press. Her nonprofit quietly took her off their leadership page. That's how public shame works. When it hits the polished ones, they disappear, without a scene, hoping silence can rinse the stain. I left her to her quiet exit from the spotlight, not because I pitied her, but because it was over. She'd tried to reduce my place in this family to a footnote. I made sure that footnote had teeth. In this case, justice looked like a clause that locked a door. The paralegal looked up. "Need a copy for your records?" "No," I said, standing. They know, and that's enough. Outside, the sky had turned pewter gray, not storming, just misting like the weather hadn't decided whether to cry or not. I walked at the same pace while the rain stitched dark threads across my sleeves. It was cool, not cold, enough to raise goosebumps, not enough to run from. Each step felt deliberate, not defiant, just clean. The sidewalk ahead glistened blurred by 1,000 small droplets. I passed a cafe where someone held the door open for an elderly couple. Across the street, a kid in a neon poncho cannonballed into a puddle and howled with laughter. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody needed to. Somewhere behind me, a family now owned a house again. They wouldn't know how it returned to them, or maybe they would, but they wouldn't say it out loud, because saying it would mean acknowledging what they'd ignored all along. And Cambria. She wouldn't fight me again, because the most unbearable thing for someone like her wasn't losing power. It was losing the illusion of control. I reached my car. Droplets danced down the windshield. I didn't start the engine right away, just sat there, Watch the rain. Some wars end with treaties, some end with silence. Mine ended the moment I realized I didn't need their apology to validate the cost I'd paid. The lake morning held a crisp stillness that belonged to neither fog nor heat. I sat on a stone bench near the water, my boots brushing damp leaves that clung stubbornly to the concrete. The lake barely moved, only soft rings where ducks had passed minutes earlier. I wore jeans, a beat field jacket, and a gray knit scarf instead of a uniform. Civilian clothes had always felt like a costume to me, but today I didn't mind the looseness, the quiet, the lack of expectation sewn into the seams. I held a photograph, curled slightly at the edges from years in storage. Me in full dress, blues, jaw, tight eyes, too hollow for the occasion. A ribbon glinting against my chest. The general's hand caught mid-shake like a wax sculpture. My family left those seats empty. I remember boarding the bus for basic all those years ago. No waving hands, no banner with my name, just my father's handwriting on a yellow sticky note stuck to the fridge. Make it worth the distance. Don't come back in shadows. I folded that note into my wallet and carried it across 3 continents. It bled once in Kandahar when I did. Still bears the stain in the corner. Now with the lake slowly waking behind me, I wondered if he'd even remember writing it. I checked the front once more and turned it over. The back held no date, no names, nothing. Just proof I'd once been seen by a nation, even if never by my own. I let a long breath out and felt my shoulders loosen. Then I bent the photograph, not in anger, but with intention. Folded it once then again, and slid it between the wooden slats of the bench beside me. Not to hide it, just to leave it. Small sneakers scraped a crescent into the dirt near the bench. I turned slightly. A girl, maybe 8, wandered close, all elbows and scraped knees, backpack bouncing behind her. Her eyes locked on the metal in my lap, an old commendation coin silver faded around the edges, the engraving worn smooth by years of habit. "Were you a real soldier?" she asked. I said yes and left it at that. She studied me like she expected to see something, maybe a scar, maybe a cape. "I want to be strong like that," she said. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the shape of the star keychain I used to clip to my rucksack. Not regulation, just a souvenir from a pre-deployment gift shop. A silly little charm that outlasted most things. I unclipped it and handed it to her. She stared at it, then at me, uncertain. "It's yours," I said. She took it carefully like a fragile promise, then smiled and ran down the path, the star swinging from her fingers. I watched until the keychain flashed twice in the light and then looked back at the water. The metal rested beside the folded photo on the bench slat. I didn't need either. Recognition doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it shows up in the eyes of a child, or in the silence that follows when you finally stop trying to prove yourself. People meet my eyes differently now, even if they still do not know the story. That small change leaves the path ahead clear enough to walk. I tucked my hands into my jacket and started moving. The mist had lifted slightly, revealing a soft blush of gold across the tops of the trees. My boots didn't echo. No spotlight followed. Just breath, step, breath, and space. Behind me, the lake murmured. On the bench, a girl sat with a medal in her lap and a story she'd carry without ever needing to speak it. I disappeared behind the trees, shadow stretching forward, not backward. Leaves whispered above me, and for the first time I wasn't waiting for someone to say, "Well done." I already knew. I used to think coming home meant being welcomed, understood, maybe even celebrated. But sometimes the greatest strength isn't in medals or recognition. It's in walking away from the need for either. Maybe your family doesn't see you, maybe they never did. But that doesn't erase what you've lived through. So I'll ask you this, what do you carry that no one else claps for? And does it make it any less real? If this story made you pause even for a moment, consider subscribing. I've got more stories, some quiet, some loud, all true in their own way.